And joining us now on the debate, Annie Kidder, Executive Director with People for Education. Joseph Flessa, Professor at OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. Rebecca Coulter, Professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Western Ontario. And Doretta Wilson, Executive Director at the Society for Quality Education. And a reminder, we call this Your Agenda because you are part of tonight's Your Agenda broadcast. Our fifth column blogger, Mike Miner, is hosting a live chat on our Inside Agenda blog. That's at tvo.org/theagenda and on our Facebook page at facebook.com/theagenda. And as we always do, you can send us a tweet, twitter.com, #YourAgenda. Jump in, we'll put your comments up on the screen throughout the course of the broadcast. Okay, nice to have everybody here. Welcome. And I guess I should start by saying, Joe, first time on television ever tonight.
That's right.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So
you look fabulous.
I'm feeling fabulous.
Annie thinks you look and feel fabulous. I will tell you, you are on with 3 pros tonight.
I understand.
So
that.
get your elbows up, kid. Okay,
Ready.
here we go. I know lots of our viewers, I suspect, have heard about what they are calling, quote unquote, and this is very unfortunate, but this is what the nickname has become, the poor school. But here are some of the more details. So, Michael, let's put these up if we can. This is in Niagara Region, as we said. The District School Board Niagara, DSBN Academy, is what the school will be called. And it will begin offering grade 6 and 7 classes this coming September in Welland. The school's goal is to get its students into post-secondary programs. All students must apply, and they can be bused to the school from around Niagara Region. How about this? Parents cannot have a post-secondary degree. And originally, they were required to prove that they live below the poverty line. They took that back now. That's not the case anymore. The school will offer an extended day, a breakfast program, and free tutoring, and parents must volunteer at the school. Okay, in alphabetical order, let's go around the table here and find out what we think. Rebecca, is this a good idea?
I'm ambivalent about this, which is unusual for me, as you know.
Yes, it is, because I know you.
On the whole, I don't think it's a good idea. I understand why the school board is doing it when you're working in a time of scarce resources and you're, grasping for different solutions to problems, and you've got the pressures of the EQAO tests hanging over you and all of those kinds of things going on. I think on the whole, however, it's better to deal with what the underlying reasons are, and that is to have an anti-poverty strategy rather than a schooling strategy. And I think it also assumes that just because you get through this school and get into a post-secondary institution, you will then have a job. And as we know, young people these days are having trouble finding jobs even when they have master's degrees, never mind, anything else. And so it's a very complicated issue.
Okay, well,
and I think on the whole, we should, stick with public education for all and keep children in their neighborhood schools.
We're going to try and unpack some of those themes throughout the course of our time here. Joseph, what do you say on this?
Well, what's been most interesting to me to watch as a sort of observer of the politics around this school is the degree of hyperbole that people have brought to the debate. I think emblematic of that is the Toronto Star's editorial on this. Used language like they're going to ship the kids off to this particular school, and they said that life isn't segregated, so why should schools be? The claim that life isn't segregated is manifestly untrue. And the Star itself published the Holchansky report, for example, which showed increasing economic segregation within the city of Toronto. So those claims are themselves sort of not very accurate. And so the degree of opposition has been fascinating to watch because it's based on a relatively nostalgic notion of common schooling. I'm not against common schooling. But I think that the proponents who claim the benefits of common schooling are typically the people who have benefited from the system. And this school is designed to address some of the needs from people who aren't benefiting from the current system.
Annie Kidder, is this a good idea?
No. There, no ambivalence. But what I really worry about, and what has been amazing to me, I agree about the hyperbole part, is that suddenly there's a lot of hyperbole about this school, but there isn't about all the other schools. And so I think that all the other sort of specialty schools and the move to more and more and more specialty schools, or I want a special school like this and I can go and create that one. And I think for the most part, those specialty schools have been made by people like me, people who, for whom the system was, it was relatively sort of easy to get through the system, and it based on class in a way. So to me, this is a part of a continuum, and that we need to look at it this way. I think because obviously we do do know that kids with lower income families are more likely to struggle at school for a whole raft of reasons. I think we also know what things make a difference in terms of how we can support them. And I do believe we should be doing those in all schools as opposed to hiving it off into one school. But I do worry about a kind of segregation that starts to go on, or separating all the kids, or kids either based on their interests, their class, their families, their income, whatever, because I think that we're missing something that the public education system, notwithstanding the reality of how segregated we are in our communities now, but that it has tried to do, and that it's important that it does. But I think just looking at the low-income school that everybody's been quite happy to oppose, I think we need to look at all the other ones too, and that's when it gets really scary for a lot of people.
We'll do that in just a second. Doretta, your first kick at this. What do you think? Good idea, bad idea?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe it's a good idea. Maybe it's a bad one. I think I agree with Joe. I think there's been a lot of hysteria around this. Unfortunately, the announcement of the school wasn't very well communicated. I think maybe the board should look at getting some better PR people, but we know that kids from less affluent backgrounds have more difficulty in school. They have higher dropout rate, and I think the school boards are trying to address these problems that affect their systems. And I think this is an attempt at this school board to address a problem that it identified.
So worth trying.
It's worth trying. And I think this school is modeled on a California chartered school that spends more time on task, a longer school day, more focused instruction, in a way that our regular school system is not set up to do. So it might be worthy to make sure that kids are all together in a place where they won't be stigmatized inside of a regular school. So why not have them in a school that they choose to go to? And that's another big factor. No one is shipping anybody off to a place they don't want to go to. This is a school of choice. It's voluntary, so parents would have to apply.
And we just saw a tweet or an email come up on the screen that says, we all care so much about our children, which is why education is such a passionate topic for so many people. Should, parents are, I gather in the Niagara Peninsula, are considering this right now, Rebecca. You get to consider it and you get to apply for it. Should part of the consideration that parents bring to bear here be, will my children be stigmatized if they go to this school? Is that part of the consideration?
Well, I think children are stigmatized regardless of what school they go to. I don't think that that's quite the question. I think the question is, they're starting the school with 150 children, and at its maximum it's going to be about, I think their PR person said about 525 or something like that. There are 5,400 children identified in the Niagara region living below the poverty line. So it's a very small proportion of the children who are going to get any benefit, assuming there is some benefit. And I guess I would say to Doretta that looking to California as an example of a good schooling situation is probably not the best, and that at the kind of targeted,
Did you say that?
small targeted. Well, because they're citing Proust, the Proust school in California is the model.
This was a chartered school. KIPP school follows the same principles. Same principles as in Toronto, the Pathways to Education. Very successful program used in Regent Park.
Program.
I think the model here, though, is San Diego, California.
Yes,
that is the model.
And I think that that's the kind of specific targeting on a small population of children. That's maybe not the best way to go, and that's why I'm a supporter of public education. I think that the examples that we see, for example, in Finland, which is a country which has universal programs and tries to equalize the population, is a much better way to go, and they have much better results on the tests. They have much more interesting kind of creative schooling there.
And a population
the teachers have much
not
more
like ours at all, right? Not nearly as multicultural a population as we have.
No, but I'm just saying that universal programming is something that works.
Doretta,
and they have an Aboriginal population as we do and so on.
But that speaks to the bigger question then. If a school board has an area where there's a lot of kids who have low achievement, high dropout rate, then trying to do things the same way we've been doing things for the past 50 years in schools isn't working. So maybe we need to expand what they are doing at this school to a broader spectrum of the school system.
Well, Joe, let me ask a basic question here. How much does a family's income influence the successful or not career of education that children have?
Okay, so the way that this question is going to get heard is poverty destiny? That's how people are going to hear that question. And obviously not. There are going to be lots of examples of people who have come up from very difficult circumstances and have been successful. However, the larger research patterns would show that undeniably background conditions like socioeconomic status have an enormous impact on school success. So has the District School Board of Niagara identified a real problem by pointing out the negative relationship between the way that the school is addressing the particular needs of kids affected by poverty? Sure, they have. They've drawn attention to a particular issue. And my sense is that that's what's causing some of this controversy, is that drawing attention to inequality and difference makes people very uncomfortable, particularly when those people don't have very much power.
Annie, you want to follow up?
Yeah, because I think that, it's funny because I think we all agree about some pieces of this. And I think not only do we know about the impact of socioeconomic status on your chances for being at risk, but I think there are lots of programs wherever they are, the States, in Canada, wherever, that have shown what does make a difference too. So if you look at something like Pathways, and I have a problem with Pathways just because it's outside of public education, it relies on private money and on philanthropy, but if you look at the experience there where there is intensive support for kids, it's expensive, but it works. It's a great investment, but they're there. There's one-on-one counseling, there's work with the families, they're with those kids every minute of the way all through school. Then they're successful.
Right.
So
and it acknowledges, if I can interrupt, it acknowledges that the high school is broken.
Absolutely.
Right? It leaves the high school
absolutely.
untouched.
Well,
and
no,
it says
but
what
they
we have
work
to
with
do.
teachers, they work with,
Their primary focus is working with youth to support them to move
Yeah.
through a broken institution.
So, I think it does both things. I don't think it does actually acknowledge that the high school is broken necessarily, but what it does say is that kids don't live, or families don't live kind of in isolation from everything else. You're in an ecosystem and every single thing affects you. And it says we have to work on all of this. And so to decide, I think, to just go, we're going to go do this in one school, as opposed to looking at all of the evidence. And I think there's a lot of evidence about what works in terms of supporting kids through school. And I agree with you, there's lots of things that we could be looking at about what's going on inside those schools. But I think this way we actually continually sort of hive off or separate off, instead of going, we actually know it does cost money, it does cost a lot of people support. Okay. Let's do that.
Let me try this, Rebecca. Let me try this with you. We, those of us of a certain age, remember back in Boston, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, is it already? Busing, right? The idea was to take poorer, mostly black kids out of poor neighborhoods and bus them to better off, I guess, white middle class neighborhoods, and the converse as well, actually. And it was controversial as hell, but a lot of people thought, maybe poverty isn't destiny, but there's certainly a correlation there. Is anybody talking about that as an option for Ontario right now, for poor kids? Bus them somewhere else, bus them to a better off neighborhood?
I don't know of anybody that's doing that. I know in some states they are busing kids based on income, not by race anymore, by income. I think North Carolina tried it in some school districts, and the only objection to it was typically parents said, well, I don't really want my children on a bus going far away. I mean, it's a natural reaction.
But that idea, would that be preferable to this?
Well, then you ask yourself, in Toronto, that's like taking kids from Rosedale and busing them to Rexdale, and kids from Malvern and taking them to the Kingsway. I mean, that's what it may mean if you want to equalize people by income, but is that really what you want to do? Or do you want to make sure that schools are doing the right things that they should be doing from the very beginning?
For all children, right? And I
Yeah,
think
but some kids need something extra. So not all kids need the same things all the time.
But maybe the other question here, the different question, is about difference. Is how do you have a system that's filled with a billion different kinds of kids in many ways. So they want different things, they learn differently, they think differently, they have different interests, they come from different kinds of families, and we got a problem, right? Because there's for the most part one system, and there's for the most part one school down the street, which I still wish that would be the school that mostly we would go to. And really the thing that the system struggles with is that. And I think right now the reaction to that difference is to divide it up more and more. And if we look at the United States, schools are becoming more and more segregated rather than the other way around.
Let me follow up on this, because you talked about actually these specialty schools a little bit earlier, and we got a list of them here. Our producer, Mark Brosen's, put this list together. And Michael Smith, our director, if you would, let's bring this up so we can show everybody. We're calling this graphic A School for Everyone. If you go in the Toronto District School Board, and obviously you meet certain criteria, you might find yourself at an Afrocentric school, or an Aboriginal school, or a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered school. The Hamilton Wentworth District School Board also offers single gender classes. The Greater Essex County District School Board offers, how about this, bilingual Arabic English language classes. Dorette, are we creating too many of these kind of specialty schools?
No, I wish we'd create some that fit better instructional practice and traditional model for some parents that are looking for those, that they have to go out to private education to find those. That would be nice to have some of those as well.
But you don't object to this?
No, I think people should have a choice, and there should be lots of alternatives. The Edmonton model of providing many, many more alternative schools seems to be very, very successful. Parents are satisfied, achievement is improving. They've focused on the academic side of things, yet providing people with lots of alternatives. Parents are given a passport in Edmonton, for example. They don't have to go to their local neighborhood school. And the 1950s, I guess, Leave It to Beaver idea that everybody's just going to walk 2 blocks to their neighborhood school is a very large city way of thinking nowadays, because what happens in a rural community where kids by nature get on a bus and have to go to the one school.
Joe, what do you think about
Can I
those
just
specialty
interrupt for
schools?
1 second just about the list? That really on that list should be the alternative school, there are
Arts-based,
way
right,
more
arts-
schools than
arts-based,
that.
yes.
All those
International
artsy
baccalaureate
schools, the IB
programs.
schools, we have to pay
Environmental
$1,200 to
education.
do
Hang
it.
on.
Yeah,
Joe's,
yeah.
so wait a minute.
Yeah.
International baccalaureate schools. We have Rosedale School for the Arts in
French
Toronto.
immersion.
French
French immersion
immersion.
schools.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a range. What's interesting about this debate about these, you've selected in the TDSB the identity-based
Yeah.
programs,
Right.
which because 2 of them at least are race-based, make people very uncomfortable. I think that's a sort of agreed upon Canadian norm. Conversations about race are very uncomfortable, right? So you've drawn attention to the most controversial programs, but again, the lens is pointed down the sort of hierarchy of power and not up. So we're not paying attention, as Annie just said, to the sort of stratification of the program of public education, which benefits high-income people. Yeah. So things like IB, French immersion, arts-based schooling, which are identifiably demographically benefiting certain groups. So if we're going to talk
better off groups.
Yeah, so if we're going to talk about the balkanization of schooling in Toronto,
Talk about the whole thing.
I would rather us look at up the scale
Yeah.
of power to the people who have the most influence in these conversations, not down at the people who have the least.
No,
Okay,
and
do you
I
want-
really agree with that. And I think it's really kind of a cheat to go, we're just going to look at this and not actually own up to where the real thing is happening. And
Okay,
it's
fair
really
point.
for my kids.
Fair point.
who,
So,
have a
Rebecca,
choice.
this kind of, I've heard the word tonight, balkanization of the public school system. You're not a fan, I assume.
There are strengths and weaknesses to that approach. There are some very good things about it, but I agree with Joe that it's very much a school for the privileged in essence. The choices, because you have to be able to take your children there, you have to be able to provide certain kinds of things. I think the same thing could be said about the Welland School. I looked at the application form for the parents who want to send children to that school, and it's so couched in middle class language. It was very, very interesting. And the parents have to commit to volunteering for a certain number of hours.
What do you mean couched in middle class language? What
Well,
does that mean?
it's, the students already have to be performing at their grade level, right? So it's creaming off a certain number of children from the top of the top of the pool, as it were, and then it's requiring parents to be volunteers, which pays no attention at all to what it's actually like to live in poverty. And so if a mother has small children at home but no access to affordable daycare, and yet has to go into the school to volunteer, that's not taken into account. They're busing kids in from all over the region. Parents who don't have access, there's not very good public transportation in the Niagara region, I don't think, and parents who don't have a car and can't afford the gas, they can't volunteer in that school. It already limits even who among the poor could go to the poor school. And so that, there are all those kinds of problems with it, and that's why a public system that's more integrative is a better approach.
Would you acknowledge that those are some shortcomings in
There are
this?
going to be challenges for sure. I agree with you that the school will have to be flexible and have to evolve as it goes along, and I think that's what they'll end up doing. It's not going to be for poor kids anymore. I think it is just parents who don't have post-secondary education. But yeah, they'll have to evolve. These models have to adapt to their local needs. But I think giving kids I give them credit for at least trying to find a way to give kids who need some kind of an advantage, to give them a leg up, because the solution for poverty is education.
Let me get Annie
they have
on
to
that,
start somewhere.
because you said right off the top, no, you don't think this is a good idea, but surely you would grant that the public education system, which isn't really one single system, it's 4 systems, and we'll talk about that in a second, it can't do it conventionally for everyone, right? There are going to be people who just for whom it's not going to work.
No. Yes and no, I agree. So then what we have to have is kind of space, breathing room within our schools to actually be able to be flexible within the schools. So that instead of going, there's one way of doing things, these are our targets, this is what education's about, a kind of narrow definition of education, that you actually go within our schools, we're movable, flexible, we're going to work together, we're going to ensure if we have a kid who's struggling because either there's help needed at home, or there's social work help, or psychological help, whatever it is, more food, one-on-one tutoring, we're going to do that, because that's really the job of public education. But it means that you have to provide those resources there, and you have to connect school to the rest of its world. You can't go, I'll be interested to hear about the poverty reduction strategy, because you can't just go, school's going to do it. You have to actually look at everything around that. And I think that's what we know more than anything. But yes, I think you can do it within schools, not in the sort of olden days model, not in Leave It to Beaver, but in more recognizing the incredible diversity and going, but you are going to have to let go the kind of, it can't be quite so fixed, and the structure can't be quite so fixed.
Let me pick up with Joe on that, because there, as I said, there is this assumption out there that we have one public school system that educates 95.5% of our kids, which is not quite right, because since the beginning of the country, it's been French and English, public and separate. Right? So we've always had these kind of distinctions within the public school system going back a long way. Is this just kind of the latest incarnation or chapter or evolution in all of that?
Well, what I think is interesting, I'm an immigrant to Canada, and to see that
from
the United States.
From where?
I moved here from California. I grew up in Ohio. So to observe these kinds of dilemmas, which strike me as particularly Canadian. How do we be different and the same? To see the degree of controversy that is generated by one small program is fascinating in a country that lives with these tensions all the time, right? So I would agree with Annie to a certain extent that I believe in a system that can acknowledge some sort of diversity and change and different needs within a system. But I don't think that having the school site be, let me say it this way, just having people who are different under the same roof does not create an integrated school.
Sure.
Right? People will be stratified within that school according to observable patterns. And one of the patterns that will be most observable are people who come from families where their parents did not go to post-secondary education, are quite unlikely to be in the stream that leads to post-secondary.
Okay,
right?
Put this up. Go ahead, Michael. You got an email here you want me to pay attention to? Let's see if we can get this up here. Here it comes. Cultural schools should be left to the private sector. That's not too provocative, is it? What do you think about that idea, Rebecca?
Well, I'm opposed to the private sector getting involved in public education, so that's what I think about that.
Wouldn't be public education if the private sector
no,
were
it
doing
wouldn't,
it. Would be private
it wouldn't
education.
Be, but, somebody has to protect the children, too, and we all have a social responsibility towards children, not just parents, but all of us as citizens have a responsibility towards children. And so, I would like to see the public school system change in the ways that we've been talking about, to be more flexible, to be more accommodating, to allow people to move in and out. But I do think that there need to be some standards as well.
And he's got
maybe, no. I think it's interesting what you're saying, because maybe part of it has to do with also the way we've changed, and that's maybe part of this incredible explosion of many schools for every different kind of child of a middle or upper middle class person. But in a way, education's become this individual right, and this thing about, what can I get as an individual for my kids out of school? And it's kind of lost a little bit, that kind of civil society piece. And it's very hard to say to parents, could you just sacrifice your kid for the benefit of the greater good? Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, public education was looked at as a kind of public good, and it's much more now looked at as a private good, a private right, a private thing that, you know, if you look at all that fundraising stuff that just came out, that's the biggest, most, you know, it's incredibly significant in terms of how we think of public education.
Doretta, let me get you. One public school, I'm inferring from this email that this person believes the public education system should be one size fits all. If you want an IB school, a school for the arts, an Afrocentric school, a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered school, do it in the private system. What do you think?
Look, we have a national policy of multiculturalism. It's supposed to celebrate all of our differences that we come together, yet we want this one-size-fits-all school system to try and make us all into something that
Happy little citizens.
Well, that's a good thing to want to do, and that's one of the things you hope to accomplish with all education, not just public, because frankly, privately schooled children have just as much of a good education as the public schools do. So, you know, in one sense, we want to celebrate all of our differences, but we want us to all be the same. So you can't do both. I mean, there's going to be that tension there all the time, that conflict. And people are, human beings by nature. They feel more comfortable with what they're familiar with, and they're going to.
But I mean, I think that's where the problem. You know, we need to have a lot of children together with one another to learn about differences. I mean, it benefits the white, middle-class, Anglo-Saxon child to be in the same classroom with a Muslim child, or, you know, other children from other cultures and other places, and I think that's a very important part of public education is to learn about other cultures, to think critically about your world, to begin to expose, to ask these questions, to talk about these questions about difference and so on. That's one of the important things I think that public education ought to do. I'm not saying that it always does, but, you know, if we take a critical approach and we see education as having particular kinds of purposes, that is to unpack some of the truths about our society and to be honest and not try to create a bunch of little conformists, that we would be far better off doing that than segregating into thousands of schools.
Michael, let's put this graph up here. This is the EQAO, which is everybody's favorite acronym. Oh boy, Education Quality Accountability Office.
Yeah.
Thanks, Annie. Okay, I'm going to take a minute here to take us through this. You see red bars and blue bars. The red bar is the Ontario average, and you can see for reading and writing and math, it is such. The blue bar is this Afrocentric school that was opened, a year or so ago in Toronto, and they did the grade 3 EQAO standards test as well. And when you took these African Canadian kids and took them out of the general system, so to speak, and you put them in this Afrocentric curriculum, where the suspicion was, the hope was, that they would do better, it looks like the test scores are showing they've done better.
But Steve, okay, I'm sorry. This is not good research. Are we
Annie.
comparing the same kids with how they were doing before? No, because they're only in grade 3 once. And these are kids, this is where I'll agree with Doretta, whose parents parents are already in that way involved in their kids. They chose to send, motivated,
this is a bad thing?
No. This is where I agree about choice. So we're not measuring those kids against themselves
So this
and
doesn't
saying,
prove that that's a success.
No, not at all, because it doesn't say these kids were doing badly before and now they're doing better.
They may have been doing well before and now they're doing well.
Yeah, now they're doing better.
Potentially, but also what this also sort of diagnoses, that the fact that we have this graphic up on the screen, is the degree of surveillance that school has been put under. This is a small program, and it attracts national and international attention.
Actually, based on 16 kids, 16
Right.
grade
The
3
amount of
students.
scrutiny placed on that school is quite astonishing.
Yeah.
So, as a person who, I like to think of myself as someone who would support the school, it's really striking that we're sort of having this conversation about them. I don't think it's necessarily bad.
But if the numbers were half the provincial average, everybody would be saying, this is a disaster, we got to shut this thing down right
But
away.
it's such a ridiculous way of measuring whether or not a school is working or not working. Sorry, but it really, because I'm sure with the low-income school in Welland, the kids will do, because they're screened, they're going to do very well. I don't think there's any question about that. And especially in schools where parents choose.
And if they do better than if they were in their regular school, then all the better. Because That's
Yeah,
what
I
we hope
think,
children
yeah.
are successful.
So, but is the point is the jury is still out on this school, on this Afrocentric school
I
curriculum?
don't think that, no, I don't think it is. I don't think that is the point, because I think the point is, I think we know that when parents are that involved and that they go and choose to send their kid to a different school and they're with their child during their education, those kids do better at school, and they're going to do better, not necessarily compared to themselves the year before, they do better than other kids.
Then here's the next question, Joe. We, on this program, in fact, we have done, I think a considerable number of programs on Portuguese Canadian kids who underachieve badly, Latino Canadian kids who underachieve badly. Should the school boards across this province be thinking about, this is not the right word, but I was going to say hiving off, but that's not the right word, creating a separate school for those kids?
Right. So I'll answer the question this way by saying that, the schools that we're talking about are still working with the Ontario curriculum, right? The Afrocentric school has an Afrocentric curriculum and perspective and shared values and all of that. They're also working with the Ontario curriculum. They're part of the public system. I actually object to the idea that these sort of culturally specific programs should be part of the private system, because then there's no scrutiny of what they're up to, right? Whereas if they are part of a public system, you've got sort of diverse voices and you've got diverse perspectives, potentially from people who weren't participating fully before in the sort of institution of public schooling. Now they see themselves in it. How is that a bad thing? How is that, actually working against the social cohesion? It sounds like it might create a sense of increased investment.
But should there be a Portuguese school then, and should there be different? I mean, there are many.
I'm not aware of a specific proposal for a Portuguese school.
But,
I'm ignorant of this issue. The Afrocentric schooling proposal is a different one. It has a history that's more than 20 years long. Those two options weren't on the table at the same time. The one that was on the table was the Afrocentric school.
We're in
So
the
red
realm
button
of-
or green button, should I go for the Afrocentric school? Yes, green button.
We're in the realm of speculation here, because I guess the question is kind of, are we on a slippery slope here, where it's an
Yes.
Afrocentric school today,
Yes.
it's an LGBT school tomorrow, maybe Portuguese, Latino.
Or a
So
school
that-
just
the next
for
day.
rich kids. Why don't we just
Which
have
we
a
already
school?
have.
We've got lots of us.
But one
got
that
lots of those
calls
already.
himself that. Like, I want a school just for kids of parents over a certain
Can I
income.
can I
People go
rephrase your
nuts.
question sarcastically, or actually say
We're
what
in
I
our
feel?
last minute, so go ahead.
Okay. What I hear you actually calling for, given that your suspicion.
I'm not calling for anything. I'm asking questions. That's
The
all.
suspicion around these alternative programs is it's calling for the dismantling of the Catholic Board. If you object to the idea that culturally specific programming is a bad idea, then there's one clear objective in Ontario.
Which is?
It would be to dismantle the Catholic Board. That is not my position. But if you're going to be suspicious of all of these alternative programs, that seems to be a logical consequence.
And we need to reconvene this group for
don't-
that program.
Don't forget First Nations education, right? That's very important. I mean,
That's
there's
right.
a
They're
First
the-
Nations
She's giving me the hook. We got to
Come
go.
on.
Annie Kidder, People for Education. Rebecca Coulter, University of Western Ontario. On the other side of the table, Doretta Wilson, Society for Quality Education. Joe Flessa making his TV debut from
Very
Boise.
well.
And very well done. Very well done. Thanks so much, everybody. That was great.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.